Welcome, everyone. This is the first in a series of webinars sponsored by Inform's Analytics Society on the topic, Closing the Gap Between Promise and Reality on Analytics Projects. We have as our very special guest, Jack Levis, a very well-known member of our Inform's practice community. And we are also joined by Eric Wickham, who is president of the Analytics Society, both of whom will provide a few words of introduction of themselves in a moment. This series of webinars is intended to bring value to members of the Society and the wider analytics community by showcasing important issues in practice, issues of interest to those seeking the CAP, Certified Analytics Professional Certification, and to share information about new and emerging areas of analytics with this community. Two last points. This webinar is being recorded and will be published on the Inform's website at a later date. Also, please submit questions via the chat capability in Zoom as they occur to you throughout the talk. We will structure those questions and spend at least 15 minutes at the end responding to them. So now it's time for introductions, and I'll start with myself real quickly. My name is Arnie Greenland, and I'm a professor of practice at the University of Maryland Smith School of Business, where I teach business analytics. Prior to that, I worked as an analytics professional for 35 years, the last 22 at IBM, where I was a distinguished engineer. Now, Jack, please share a few words about yourself.
Hi, my name is Jack Levis. I'm recently retired from UPS after being with the company for 43 years. I don't normally have to get dressed anymore. I did this for you, wearing something other than a t-shirt today. When I was at UPS, I was responsible for roadmaps, engineering. I was part of the engineering group, mostly for final mile, what we were going to do for our methods, processes, and procedures. Part of my responsibility included 2 operations research divisions. I'm really looking forward to this chat of 3 great friends talking to each other. And I'm convinced that the future of supply chain is data, operations technology, and advanced analytics. And looking forward to talking about how we can make that a reality.
Thanks a lot, Jack. Eric, please also say a few words about yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eric Wickham, and I've had a pretty rich set of experiences in my career. I've been an internal consultant, an external consultant, held some leadership positions with the U.S. Air Force, Norfolk Southern Corporation, Schneider National, IBM, Tata Consultancy Services, and now on my own as an independent consultant. I wanted to give a quick thank you to Arnie and his team who put together the idea for these webinars and brought this to fruition. And thank you, Jack. We couldn't have a better person to help kick off this important effort.
Okay, thanks so much. I'll start this out with the first question, which is, what is the gap and why is it there? And I'll ask Jack to start with his thoughts on that question.
Wow, we're going to start right into it, Arnie. So, yeah, that's the $1 million question. Actually, it's the $1 billion question, because everybody thinks that analytics can truly make a huge impact in business and society, and that's worth billions and billions of dollars. Yeah, I absolutely think there's a gap between the promise and reality of analytics. I've seen this firsthand, and my opinion is jaded by what I have seen. You know, Ann Robinson, when she was the past president of Informs, she worked on a strategic message of what is the definition of analytics. And the Informs definition of analytics is the scientific process of transforming data into insight for making better decisions. Data moves to insight, and that moves to action. So the key is the better decision. And really, if we take a step back, do we see better decisions today, significantly better decisions today through analytics? I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're at the place that analytics is truly embedded in everything business does, and it's driving the promise of better decisions. It's not pervasive yet. I think the promise is there. I think it's real, but we have to execute to that promise. We have lots of cool tools and we have lots of cool techniques, but do we truly have analytics inside that decision process? You know, we do a lot of tools and that might give us insight, but remember, it's insight to a better decision. And if you get insight and you don't get a better decision, that's just trivia. You need insight that moves to action. And I think that's where we're not hitting the mark yet. We have lots of cool tools and insight, but it's not driving those decisions. You know, too often we focus on technology and not the better decision itself. Once at a conference, I met a person who his title said manager of big data. That doesn't make sense to me. At UPS, when I was there, we didn't have a big data project, an IoT project, an AI project. We didn't even have an OR project. We had business projects. And the goal of the business project was to make an impact, to make a better decision, and whether it was big data or AI or OR, those were hows, they weren't whats. The what is the better decision. And if there's anything that I think we really need to do is focus on that better decision. And when that's happening and analytics and OR is embedded inside those better decisions, then we've won. So I don't think we're there at that promise yet. You know, all this being said, and with the focus on better decisions, I do think organizations should still have a % of their budget that goes to blue sky things. You know, you don't always know the decision you're trying to make. So you should have some % of budget on blue sky, things you don't know, experimentation, where you don't know what decision you're trying to go after. But that should be a % of your budget. And I think organizations should at least know what that is and say, I'm dedicating 5, 10, 15, whatever that % is to blue sky. And the rest should focus on projects that lead to better decisions. So that's my thought.
Eric, do you want to add any ideas to that?
I have a couple thoughts to follow on that. I think one of the things that we see with analytics, and I'll use AI as an example, is that there's a whole lot of hype around it. And we see some successes, and people think that because of those successes that they can just jump in, apply these things, and magic is going to happen in their company. But if we look at a couple of years ago, we heard from Tesla and Uber and Google that we were going to have self-driving cars. It seemed almost imminently, and they were really hyping that. But a couple of years later, the hype has kind of quieted it down, and they're focusing on some real bread and butter applications. One of the recent ads by Microsoft featured an application where they were able to analyze photos taken by remote cameras and pick out ones that had snow leopards in them. So that goes back to one of the original demonstrations of AI to find the cat pictures. So the reality, even though that's been helpful to them, they took what apparently took 10 days for a human down to 10 hours, which is a benefit. But that's far different from the complicated problem of self-driving vehicles. So we do have, in some aspects of analytics, where the promise or the expectation gets ahead of the reality of what can be delivered. The other thing I want to mention is that there are definitely some mature analytics out there. There's things that have been done in optimization, simulation, and so forth for 50 years or more. And yet, there's other reasons why we're not always hitting the mark with those to achieve the benefits that could be had. And I think we'll touch on some of those, but I wanted to mention that in my career, I really fell in love with practice because of the gap. And that is, I discovered when you do, let's say, good math, that's not enough to impact decisions. You have to also be able to address many other issues. And one of them are issues related to people. And I like to say that some of the toughest problems you'll ever solve are people problems, not math problems.
Okay, great input. I actually want to add a point that's related to the people issue that you just brought up. We come to analytics projects with a group of people who have wide variations of knowledge and experience. And I think that's one of the core reasons why there is this gap. So analytics professionals on a project are trained in and focus on the tools, the algorithms, the solutions. But managers, both senior managers and middle level managers, they're pretty much focused on the business. So we've got different people in the environment, each with sort of a different background, different focus. And so the great challenge for an analytics professional is to bring these different individuals together, to make sure that each understands the concerns of the other. In fact, that they even learn to use the same language that they speak about. In other words, the analytics professionals need to learn the language of that business. And at least some of those at the business should begin to learn some of the language that the analytics people are using. And there's a lot of growth, if you will, on both sides. We often need to have a person who's a connector, someone who can reach across the boundaries and understand each of the other players to sort of act as a glue to make a project successful. And many times it's the middle managers, but it could also be senior management who have that role. But the bottom line is to make that connection so that you understand each other and hopefully work to shrink that gap.
So Arnie, there's certainly, I don't think that we should give the impression that analytics is not making an impact in business, because there's no question it is. And to your point, for decades, the profession has. There's lots of things the profession's done. That wasn't, the message. But think of the growth in analytics. Think of the growth in spending. That's what I'm saying, is I don't think we've matched what businesses are seeing, that return on investment. It's certainly there, but that investment was there because of a promise of much more than what has existed for decades. And that's where, I think some of that gap is, the new things.
Okay, great input. So I think it's time to go on to our next question, which is the next thing you should think about, which is what are the strategies you've used in the past to bridge this gap? And again, I'd like to start with Jack on that question.
All of us are biased by our past experiences. And I will admit I'm very biased, but I've had some specific past experiences that give me this perspective on analytics. We know that analytics has tremendous support in businesses today. No matter where you go, you hear the terms of analytics or AI or big data or IoT. That's everywhere. But I think analytics is a fragile thing, and I've seen it firsthand. As I said, I'm biased by past experience. When I started working with the operations research group at UPS well over 20 years ago now, the group was on the chopping block, believe it or not. Today, by the way, at least it is seen as a strategic advantage for the company. But 20 years ago, it was on the chopping block. And why is that? It's because at that point in time, there was no measurable benefits that could have been attributed to the operations research group and advanced analytics. The promise was there, but there were no tangible benefits, and organizations, after investing so much time and effort, got tired, and the question was raised, should the group be disbanded? So the call to action for the group at that time was to make sure that it was making an impact, make sure that it was improving business decisions. And what we did is we focused on the decision. That was the first thing we did. Everybody had to know what business decision they were there to impact. And that was, at some level, a change of focus, a change from the technology to the business. We measured benefit. Everything we did had to have some measurable benefit. It didn't mean that every project had to be successful, but it did mean you measured benefit, and people needed to know what benefit they were bringing back to the company. That meant we probably had to build some prototypes, we had to build some test tools so that we could go out and make sure that the ideas we had could actually get implemented and impact the bottom line. You know, I've been asked in those days, you know, what we did to sell OR internally. We didn't. It's not a pet rock to sell. OR should stand on its own. Analytics should stand on its own. And I've never met a senior manager where if you said, I've got a project that is going to implement these type of benefits and you really do it, that they don't support you. You don't have to sell it. You give them the information they want that proves you have benefits, and that's what we did. That also meant we had to ride a very fine line between over-promising and under-delivering. If you didn't promise anything, there was no project. If you said, I'm just going to run a project and don't know if there's any benefits, no one's going to buy it. But if you over-promise and don't deliver, now you have, you've lost your support. You've lost your credibility. So one of the things we did is we defined the difference between research and development. You know, I don't know. I can't do what you all can do. I'm not an OR professional. But I don't know how, when you're working on something that's research, how you say, and the research will be done on this date. By definition, it's research. So we wrote that line. We had a language. Is this research or is it development? And when it's research, there were papers. There were white papers. Here's where we stand. When we moved to development, now we're starting to make a commitment. And we wrote that line. It also meant that we had to keep multiple types of projects in the pipeline. We had short-term projects that were going to deliver benefit in, call 3 to 6 months, medium-term projects that might have been a year to 2 away, and long-term projects. And almost like if you ran your own business, the short-term projects brought you back credibility or brought you back some funding to do the long-term project. So you're always riding a fine line. Are we going to work on short-term or long-term? But like your own business, you have to have some things coming out. You have to have some new tools, and we kept short, medium, and long-term in focus. Arnie, you mentioned, I think you started going down the path of what's called a translator today, business focus, getting the business involved. And that was something we learned in those days. The business had to have skin in the game. We had to have people that were from the business, they call that translators today, that guided the OR group, that could be a link to IT. And by the way, we also had to get closer with IT. In those days, we were presenting to IT all the time saying, one day the research is going to turn into an IT project, so you need to know what's coming along. That has to go along for the ride. Today, at UPS, OR is seen as a strategic function, without a doubt. When UPS won the Edelman Award and our CEO was there, listen to what he said. He talked not about the project, he talked about OR as a function. He talked about what OR can do for UPS. So, you know, as I said, I'm biased, but I've seen advanced analytics from, I don't know if we need this at all, to being very integral into what projects need to do. I know that in those days I was scared all the time. And I think if you're an analytics professional, you should be scared today because it's a fragile thing. Businesses are investing. You know, there was an old saying about the lion and the gazelle, and I used to talk about that. But, you know, it goes in Africa every morning, a gazelle wakes up and it knows it has to outrun the fastest lion or it's going to be eaten. And a lion wakes up and knows it has to outrun the slowest gazelle or it's going to starve. So that means whether you're a lion or a gazelle, your ass better be running in the morning. And that's how we were. We were running every single day.
Okay, great advice and input. I want to add one other thought, which I think is in terms of thinking about a strategy for bridging that gap. I want to harken back to the certified analytics professional information, the body of knowledge behind that certification that it talks about in the job task analysis, a number of very structured activities. And so I believe that having a solid structure for a project can be a huge benefit. And in the JTA, there's a recommendation to, if you will, in the life cycle, to create a business problem framing document. And it talks about the steps you might have to go through to do that, to include the background, the stakeholders, the challenges, resources available, timeline, all the information you need to understand what is the problem. We're not even talking about the analytics, we're just talking about the business problem. And there are other documents that are discussed, for example, a data analysis plan and an actual technical, if you will, analytical analysis plan. All of these steps along the way in the job task analysis, I think, are ways to do what we were talking about earlier, which is to communicate, to build a link between the business side and the analytical side to shrink that gap. And having it written down is sort of a very critical aspect of that whole process. So frankly, within our own profession and our own certification process, we've got some good direction and guidelines to help us get to the right place. So Eric, you have any thoughts as well?
Yes, I do. I also think in terms of some of the discipline that organizations can bring to the projects that they have, it can be beneficial. I've been, as I mentioned, internal consultant for a number of organizations as well as an external consultant. What I found is if you look at the spectrum, in a lot of organizations, it's kind of the Wild West, and they're doing what I call doing things, but they're not necessarily directed. They don't necessarily document things. They don't, if you ask someone, they may not have an answer to the question, what is it that you're trying to deliver, when, and how is it going to deliver value? And so on the opposite end, consulting organizations know that they have deadlines that they have to meet to satisfy clients. And so they have developed a lot of different tools, some of which you've mentioned. And I'll highlight two things. One is project planning, and to be able to map out at some level the work that needs to be done and to understand what resources are going to be needed, as well as to understand what involvement your clients have to have, and so that they can understand where they fit into it and what level of involvement and what times of the year they're going to be needed. And one thing that I find within projects for analytics is that being agile or iterating can be very helpful, because you can both deliver value early, but you can also get a lot of feedback on things and keep from heading down the wrong path. So I think that that's valuable. The other thing I wanted to mention, a consulting tool, is called a stakeholder analysis. And it looks at the stakeholders that are involved in a project, and it essentially assesses where they are with respect to that project. So on one end, you can imagine someone who is trying to kill the project, who wants nothing to do with it. And on the other end are people who are ardent supporters of that. So understanding where those stakeholders are and figuring out what things you might be able to do to move some of them. And I think one of the most important things is to have someone who is a skeptic and to be able to turn them into a believer. It's a very, very valuable thing to be able to do. So just because somebody's sort of against the project doesn't mean that they can't be very helpful to the project. And skepticism is very good to drive the team to really deal with the problems and to put together a good solution, and again, to try to win over that person. So bottom line is bring some level of discipline, and in my experience, especially if you work as an internal consultant, learning some of the consulting skills can be very beneficial to help close this gap.
Okay, any other thoughts, Jack, or should we move on to the next question?
You know, I don't know. I feel, are we in agreement that we think we're not, you know, maybe I'm off base in the thought that analytics is not meeting the promise. That decision that we're improving. So yep. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I completely agree. As you said earlier, there's a lot of great successes. And, you know, when we listen to the Edelman presentations, we see one after another. But there's also a lot of companies that don't bring these tools to bear, even different parts of companies that don't, are not as sophisticated or knowledgeable or comfortable with tools. Sometimes it's our problem that we don't communicate. I know I've had projects where we had a great technical solution, but the client was just not ready for that. You know, not ready for an optimization model to be the decision maker without another human, if you will, in that loop. Or so maybe we needed to structure a path for that client to get from where they were to where they needed to be in order to get the full value out of it. So a lot of this has to do with how we present our solution and how we plan to, what solution we plan to do, given the, if you will, the place where that client is in terms of their acceptance or understanding or energy about using analytics. So,
you know, I think we're fortunate to be involved with Informs. We're fortunate to be able to sit with three friends and discuss like this and getting that experience and the varied experience from us all. I think that, you know, some decisions are easier than others. A long-term decision, you know, where you're going to build a building. OR has been doing that forever, location analysis. But that decision is so far in the future, and there's a single decision maker, really, and it's one decision, that's easy. But there's tons of decisions where I think the real value is going on every day that I think is underserved. You know, I get a lot of calls, people wanting to know about analytics and OR in the transportation business. Think about this. As you're driving down the road, look at all the trucks driving down the road, all the little mom and pops moving our e-commerce goods and the goods of this country. I'm betting you the vast majority of them have no analytics or OR tools going on. You got to ask yourself why. We know there's a ton of tools out there. Why? Why are these trucks rolling down the road not using these advanced analytics tools? And I think it goes to what you said. The problem's more difficult than it looks. There's a human nature of the problem that needs to be taken into account. it's more difficult. As I said, we're fortunate to be with Informs. We're fortunate with the people. The people that I migrate to are those that make an impact, like you and Eric and Ann Robinson and the ones that I've mentioned. You know, our chief scientist at UPS, Ranga Nugahali, he's probably on the call. Ranga knows how to get stuff done. He may not have the most elegant solutions in the world, but Ranga gets things done that make a business impact. And if we all can get that focus, I think we'll go a long way into driving great improvements.
Okay, great input. I think it's a good time at this point to ask Jack to talk about an important case study that he can share with those on the call about how the gap was successfully managed. So I'll pass it on to you.
Sure. I mentioned Ranga Nugahali earlier. We had a project called Orion. It actually won the Edelman Award. This was, a labor of love for many of us at UPS. Me specifically, but I know Ranga. We lived this project, and it ended up reducing 100 million miles driven a year from our United States fleet. It reduced $300 to $400 million of cost annually, and it changed the company. But here's a question that is on my mind. People ask about that type of innovation. I don't know. What Orion does is it comes up with a sequence for a driver to deliver their route, a sequence that meets business rules that are implicit or explicit at the lowest cost and make sure we make service. So as I said, people ask about innovation, but is that idea innovative? I don't think so. We've been talking about optimizing drivers' routes for decades. TSPTWs have existed. So it's not the idea that in this case study that is innovative. Coming into your office and saying, hey, Arnie, wouldn't it be great if we went ahead and optimized these routes? That's not an innovative idea. The execution of Orion and the thousands of people that took the idea, made it a reality, implemented it, and actually made a change, that's what's innovative. So I think our mindset needs to be, innovation isn't getting in a room, brainstorming, and coming up with the idea for A, B, or C. Innovation is executing the idea. It's not the idea, it's the execution of it. And that's what we did with this tool, Orion. We started with, can we just create the algorithm itself? And believe it or not, we spent 5 years working on the algorithm. Not because we couldn't create a TSPTW. We had a TSPTW, or Ranga did, up and running in months. But we couldn't get the output of the TSPTW to be something implementable by UPS drivers who are delivering 120 stops a day, making more money than others in the sector. We couldn't get results that were something humans could implement. So we learned that there's a difference between feasibility, optimality, but implementability. We needed to close some gaps. We needed to come up with a tool that could balance consistency and optimality. We needed to come up with a tool that could balance cost and risk. And that's what we worked on for 5 years, something that could work with 70,000 drivers every day, whether you're in a rural area or an urban area, and whether it's Christmas time or the middle of summer. That's where the challenge was. And we did that by working with drivers. And after about 5 years of struggling, we finally had an algorithm that worked. And the way we did it, you know what I used to say? We didn't get smart until we realized how stupid we were. We had to throw away all the work we did for 4 years and said, let's redesign the process. Let's start from scratch. Let's start looking at all the decisions all over again and stop just assuming it was a TSPTW. Because in the final result, it wasn't a TSPTW. So we had to redesign the process. We gathered all the necessary data, and then we proved it was implementable. And we finally did that with tremendous effort from the OR group and the business groups involved. What we did next is what we said earlier. We had to prove there's benefit. The results look good in the lab, and it looked good on the road with a handful of drivers. We had to prove that this could really work in the real world. So we created our first prototype test in 2008. And that test was for a group of drivers who used the tool every day, and we measured that we could achieve benefits. And we got benefits. And then we did it again, and we did it again, and we did it 11 different times, proving that the tool could work in different operating environments. We tested how to train, we tested what metrics needed, we tested how to communicate, and we worked with drivers every single day, continually improving the tool until we thought we were now ready to build the whole system, build something that was integrated with IT. So we went to our C-suite, we got funding, we had already proven benefits, and that was a lot of money we asked for, but they gave us permission to get going. We built the tool with IT, we put it in the field, tested again, and now we had to deploy. We had to deploy to 55,000 drivers. We actually had 700 people on the team deploying a driver at a time, making sure that the tool worked, they understood it, and that's where change management came in. We couldn't make this work unless we really went through change management. So think about this for a minute. If the answer from an analytics tool or an OR algorithm is intuitive, chances are they're already doing this. So really, you're going to get your gains from something that's not intuitive. Therefore, when there's humans involved in decision making, you have to go through change management. They have to understand it. They have to buy in. And that was the project. This was a business project. It had a business owner who was the translator, made sure that OR and IT were linked. Believe it or not, if you ever feel like it, I did a TED Talk on this subject, going through the dark days, through the successful days. So stealing a little bit from Carnegie Mellon University, if you think about 3 steps of a project like this, a case study, first step is the analytics, the OR, you have to build the algorithms. And that would include getting data and things like that. Second step is you have to build it into a process. You have to build the IT systems, the supporting data. You have to put it together in a suite of tools. The third step is deployment. Even though the algorithms took 5 years, I think that was about 10% of the total effort. And even though building the IT systems were tremendous effort, I think that was about 25%. So the two together, building, I think was only about 35% of the effort. By far, the largest effort was deployment. The thing that really kept me up was, how do you make the change happen? How do you take a tool like this and make it something people use every day? That's what I think thousands upon thousands of UPSers should be proud of. They took this and they implemented it. Remember, I started, it wasn't the idea that made it innovative. It was the execution, the ability to execute to 55,000 drivers every day. Innovation is not the idea, it's the execution of an idea.
Okay, great answer. And I think we're reaching a place where it's good. It's a good time to kind of summarize things. And we'd like to close with a few words on best practices, which you've learned that avoid the kind of gaps we've been discussing. And maybe Eric and I can add a few words after you start, Jack.
Sure. So I've probably already gone through this, but let's just kind of summarize. So again, my perspective, take this with a grain of salt. As I said, everybody's jaded by past experiences. Step one, focus on decisions and work backwards. If you start with the decision and work backwards, you say, what information did I need to make that decision? You work backwards. What tools do I need to give me that information? You work backwards from there. What data do I need for the tools? I don't think it's a good idea to start with the tools, hoping it gets to a decision. You start with the decision and work backwards. That makes everybody's job easier. Prove your benefits and document. There's an old saying, nobody wants to be sold to, but everybody loves to buy. When you have documented your benefits, people are going to say, give it to me. So document benefits, know what they are. You need to understand and mitigate data limitations. I've never, ever, ever been on an analytics project where data was acceptable. We always had to do some additional data gathering. Often data might be put into a system for transaction purposes, historical purposes. Don't think you can just use that data to predict when it was created for a different reason. Let me give you a quick aside on this. Hopefully I can take 30 seconds. Once had an analytics project trying to determine the flow of goods through the network. And that project said UPS needed tremendously more capacity in New York and St. Louis. Why New York and St. Louis? New York kind of made sense, move everything from the East Coast down to New York, but why St. Louis? Why did it move it all there? And people would say, it's because of the rail yards, because of the cost of labor, but I knew the algorithm didn't take that into account. You know what it was? Of the millions of pieces of data UPS had, one piece of data said you can go from New York to St. Louis for free. And the algorithm said, if I can do it for free in 0 time, I'll move everything between New York and St. Louis. Be careful about your data. You're always going to need to cleanse it. I've never seen a case where you didn't. Build analytics into the process. Nobody wants to do their job and have an analytics tool on the side. And the tools, the methods, the metrics, they all need to be one thing. And that's what you should focus on when you get towards the end. Don't wait for the perfect system. It doesn't exist. They say, you know what, the good is the enemy of perfect. Build something that makes an impact and let it grow. Don't wait for what's perfect. For analytics leaders, and I think this is important, I wasn't a frontline practitioner. Leaders should understand the different types of analytics and what each can do and what each cannot do. A leader doesn't have to be a hands-on practitioner, but at a minimum, you should be able to say, don't tell me that I'm going to use big data to optimize a supply chain or whatever example you want to use. A tool has a place, an analytics leader should understand it. The leader should also break down barriers for the teams and let the teams do what they do and then take the hit as the projects are moving ahead. I mentioned earlier, understand the difference between research and development. Don't try to force a date when you're in the middle of research. That's not going to happen. I don't think it's fair to the team. Don't promise something when you know you're just researching it. Be careful with that. I cannot say enough about change management. As I said, if the answer was intuitive, they'd already be doing it. You're talking about changing behavior. If you're working on an analytics program to go into an automated building, no problem. There's no humans involved. But as soon as a human's involved, you got to worry about change management, and that could be metrics. One thing I listen for is the conversation. If you have not changed what people talk about in the morning, you're a flavor of the month. You need to have metrics, methods, communication, everything from Cotter's change management philosophy. You need to, as a leader, make sure you understand that. That's probably one of the most important things UPS has done. And then what we're doing here, something that I credit with my personal growth, learn from others and network. And I believe that Informs is a wonderful way to learn from others. This is a way to learn. I can't thank you and Eric for everything you do. Inform supports this. Join a society, get involved. You will grow, and as you grow, your analytics projects will also grow.
Okay, Jack, that was amazing. Thank you so much for your thoughts. I think we've reached a place in our discussion where we're going to open up the for questions, and I know that Eric has taken a little control over the incoming questions, and will sort of for either himself or either Jack or me based on the specific question. So Eric, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Okay, let me mention for everyone on the phone, if you have additional questions, then we have time to answer those. So give that a little thought and feel free to put another question in the chat. I wanted to have a quick follow-on to what Jack said, especially related to new analytics practitioners. And what I think in leading into this gap discussion, I think the first thing you should do as a new analytics practitioner is to focus on being a solid contributor. So whatever you're doing, whether it's descriptive, predictive, or prescriptive analytics, being able to demonstrate and develop those skills. The second thing is to develop industry knowledge. So take a great interest in whatever company or organization you're working for and what they do. Learn the terminology, learn the concepts, be able to converse with people that are in a business function. And then the third thing, there's an old saying from Yogi Berra. He said, you can observe a lot just by watching. So what you should do is to observe what your analytics leaders are doing, what business people that they may be interacting with are doing, and you can learn probably as much from a poor example in some cases as you can from a positive example. So when it comes into that, as you develop in your career, you'll be able to start thinking more broadly than just the data and the analytics that you're using, but you'll be able to think about all of these issues related to people and projects and timelines that you'll need to grow into. So for now, observe and learn from what other people are doing. The first question that we have from the audience, Arnie, I'd like to direct to you, and that is, are you aware of any academic literature on analytics project success factors? Has anyone done sort of some case studies looking at different projects and seeing what are some of the key things that led to success or versus failure?
There's a huge literature. What I'm going to just do is describe a few of the, frankly, it's very similar to what Jack ran through near the end of his, his remarks relating to the best practices. But the core success factors are, that I can think of right off the top of my head, are senior level buy-in is one of the most critical success factors. So that when you are actually engaged in setting up a project, it's important to understand who are the players, who can make the decisions, and who really needs to understand the value and the benefit in terms of as Jack said, in very, very concrete terms. What is the benefit? So articulating that to the senior people in the organization, and then having that senior person, if you will, buy in, which means they will provide the kind of resources and support you need so that you can get to the end. Very critical factor. A second one that I would like to put forward is communication. That is that you're maybe over communicating, making sure that, and I described earlier a set of documents that are recommended in the JTA. I think those are great. That would be a great sort of structure to use from which to develop and to make sure that your communication processes are first of all, they're the right things to communicate, and that they're well written, very well communicated. Maybe they go along with presentations that are also very, very well done. But also just the regular communication that you do in a project to make sure that everybody's informed, that needs to be informed, and that no one's surprised when they walk into a meeting and you hear something. You don't want to make it the first time that they hear it. I guess the last one I'd like to focus on, and this is obviously a technical organization, technical expertise is critical. That is, you do need to bring the right tool to the right to the project you're trying to solve. And one of the pitfalls that often happens is there's what they know is what you hear people describe as the hammer and nail problem. If you're an expert in using a hammer, everything you look at is a nail. So sometimes the client may not be ready for a particular solution. Maybe an optimization solution is a great solution, but if the client isn't ready in terms of their maturity level or understanding or just their where they are in terms of the business, that needs to be in the right place. So those are the ones off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you, Arnie. Jack, I'm going to direct the next question to you. We've talked a lot within Informs about what is operations research and management science and what is analytics, how do those compare? But now we have the rise of data science, and I'll also add artificial intelligence. Is there some sense perhaps that analytics has failed in this gap, and that now some new terms are coming in vogue because of that?
I hate that question. I wish I knew the answer, right? Go back to the history of, at some level, it feels to me, so I'm going to apologize for this answer and apologize for offending some of my friends. It feels to me that a lot of what operations research is doing today is we're very focused on the research word. And that wasn't the history of this profession. It was better decisions, and you didn't need the fancy big algorithms and fancy computers. So if you go back to the roots, from my perspective, operations research at its roots encompasses analytics, data science. It is the discipline of better decisions. For some reason over time, from my perspective, different words started popping up. System engineering, analytics, data science now appears to be the word that is sticking. At least I assume it's sticking. You hear that more than anything now. So I don't know that I have an answer other than it's all about making better decisions. I have seen, honestly, again, with the risk of offending people, too many of the new folks in data science not really focusing on things that are going to make the real decision and impact. And I think that's risky. I think it's it puts the profession at risk because there's such a growth in spending in organizations in this area, and it doesn't take long, as I've seen, where the organization says, "Am I really getting benefits?" So call it whatever you want. I prefer, impact engineering. It's all the same. Data into insight into better decisions. And that's what I care about. I think that OR should really grab it. And I think Informs as a community, Informs leadership is trying to do that and take back what should be the profession and saying Informs and our people, we make better decisions.
That makes a lot of sense. I definitely agree with you. I'm not one to construct Venn diagrams and say this is this and that is that, and here's the overlap between these things. I'm of the opinion that anything, to your point, that helps people make better decisions, wherever it was born, whatever it's labeled, can bring value, and that's what really matters. As far as the term analytics, I want to make a quick point, and that is that one of the ways that analytics kind of came to the popular attention was through sports with Moneyball and so forth. And I think that it continues to be, especially in baseball, very strong, even to the point where the old school announcers are now talking about analytics, where sometimes they're not really that thrilled about it, but they understand that it's all about that. So I think it will continue to be, very well talked about and understood in the culture. And I don't think it's, fly-by-night concept that's just going to be replaced by something else. Another question we have here is, in terms of closing the gap, would you draw any distinction between decisions that are perhaps still made by humans with some support versus decisions that could be fully automated?
Yeah, I think that a lot of decisions require a human right now in the middle. When the human's out of the mix, it's easier. It just is, but you better have a darn good decision. I mean, think about it. Descriptive analytics, a human by definition has to look at the data. You have to get insight. Predictive analytics, really you're dealing with percentages. I got an 80% chance of this, 70% chance of that. You're not really saying this is the one answer. When you get to OR, I mean, really the prescriptive analytics, what our groups seem to do more of than anything, now you're giving the answer without all the human interpretation. And if you can get that without the human in the middle, that's great. But humans got to accept the decisions. And I think we're far from that still. Like you said with AI, we're saying we're gonna have self-driving cars, but we're really just recognizing cats right now. It's a ways to go. By the way, to the question Arnie had, again, Informs is a great place. I know that there's research already on, closing the gap, and our own Jeff Cam from Wake Forest is working on some new research in that area. So I encourage any of you, if you've got ideas, reach out to Jeff. This is a passion of his, to come up with ways to close that gap. And I know he's working on that now with multiple organizations.
Okay, thank you. That's Jeff Cam. Cam is spelled C-A-M-M. Arnie, question for you. In terms of this closing the gap, what should someone who is what we would refer to as an isolated practitioner, they're in say a large company, but they don't have really a team, they're just working alone. What are some of the considerations that they would have to make sure that they are able to deliver value for their organization?
That's an interesting question. I spent my whole career in a large organization, so I'm gonna give you a not necessarily in my own personal experience, but what makes sense to me as an answer, which is figure out a way to reach out to others. So in other words, when you're in a big organization, one of the things you benefit from is you have someone you can. Well, we used to be able to walk down the hall. Now we use social media and other ways to communicate, but we have a lot of ways to stay in touch with people, even though we can't walk down the hall. But anyway, in a big organization, you have lots of people to turn to share ideas, to get ideas, to brainstorm with, etc. So I would suggest reaching out to an organization, to getting active in an organization like Informs, so that you go to meetings, you meet others, that you can network with others, get people that you can feel comfortable talking to about problems. I do get a lot of emails myself, by the way, from people that I've worked with or have interacted with at Informs and say, what do you think about this problem? Who would I who could deal with it? What's the expertise I need? So, you know, and I'm usually happy to suggest to someone I know, usually in Informs, that's the right person to talk to. So typically, I mean, at least my first thought was it's the interaction that you can get from, if you're a sole practitioner and you're working in an environment in that way, best thing to do is figure out a way to interact with others, such as with Inform.
And I think also,
Okay.
also in there, Eric, you know, go back. If you're a lone ranger in an organization, you got to get some wins. You got to get some impact. And, you know, put that in your briefcase. And this is what I got you. You know what's going to happen? You're going to be asked for more and more things. And then you're going to be told, well, I can't do this, but give me another person. Now you got a department of 2. And you get gains, and the organization's going to go, what do you need? Give me another one. Now you got a department of 3. It starts with the wins. It starts with proving benefit. No senior leader is going to turn down something that's saving them money or improving services. It'll happen if you prove the worth.
All right, well, we're at time. Arnie, would you like to say a word about the survey?
Yes, I am going to mention that a survey is going to go out from to all those who participated, and we really would appreciate your feedback and input as to, you know, how we go forward, some ideas you might have about other topics, etc. And I also want to just thank you for, we had a great level of participation, nearly 70 people at the height. We still have close to 60 who are here at the bitter end, so to speak. So I want to thank you for hanging in there, and look forward to your feedback. And thank you very much to Jack, to Eric, to the Inform staff who helped us get this organized. And I wish you a very good day.
One more thing.
Okay.
You know, went through best practices, and I'm looking at the list of attendees. I see a lot of UPSers there. You can't forget the team. Build yourself the team. I'm looking at some of your names, and you all, I miss you. You are the best people I've ever worked with. You've made an impact, and you've proven it worked. You've changed the world. So great to see some of those names out there, but don't forget the importance of the team.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jack. And thanks for everybody for joining up.